In this video, I want to discuss other types of charts. So I'm just going to go through your text a little bit with you here and highlight some key points. But these are charts that you can try on your own at home. As we went through a lot of the main, bigger, more common types of charts already. So here you have one set of charts called hierarchy charts. So they're like pie charts in that they show the relative contribution of groups to a whole. However, they also show subcategories, which makes them a little bit different. So what you see here are a tree map chart and then also a sunburst chart. So on the left, we have data from sunrise fund sectors, and they have different categories here. And you can see the colors here are matching over here as well. And in this chart, so the different categories, so we have three different categories: information, service, and manufacturing. So you have those three different colors. And then each of those has subcategories as well. So for instance, for information, you see 4 subcategories here, and then you see 4 little boxes that are blue, right? So we're broken down here as well. And they are broken down by size. So notice how hardware has the largest percent at almost 12. Media and software are pretty close, so those look about the same size, although media is a little bit bigger. And then the smallest portion is telecom, which is the smallest portion here. So you do have this kind of proportional breakdown of the subcategories. And the sunburst chart is very similar. So you have the 3 main categories as the inner parts of the circle, and then you have those subcategories as the outer parts. And again, we try to break them down proportionally as well, so that the larger sectors have more of that piece of the pie, so to say, than the others. And again, these are things that Excel can do if you're interested in those type of charts as well. Another type of chart, which could be a combination chart, but could also just be a bar chart, as well as called the Pareto chart. So this Pareto chart is a combination because it also has this line or this curve with it as well, as a second piece. So this piece here is actually typically called an ogive as part of that line. But the Pareto chart is typically the bar portion, but again, you can combine those two together as well. The big thing with the Pareto chart is that it is a bar chart, but what they do is the columns are in order from highest to lowest. So they're rearranged so that the highest category is first, followed by the lowest category at the end. This works really well when you have categorical data here at the bottom. I think it's a little bit confusing if your x-axis has numbered data, because then your numbers are out of order. So that's not always the best choice. But this is a really nice way to use a bar graph, particularly if we're doing categories and you want to see the most popular categories to the least popular as well here. And then this line here represents the cumulative percent. So at the end, all 100% is included there for the different breakdown of the categories. So this is an option as well that you can use, and a special kind of basically column or bar chart here as well. Histograms are another type of popular chart. Let me show you an example. So here is a histogram. It is a column or a bar chart, but where the columns are actually touching each other. So the example they're given here, so Excel does histograms a little bit, just a little bit differently than if we were to do them by hand or if you took stats class. So they create what are called bins, and those bins are these right here. So the different levels or different like widths of the bars. And Excel can create them automatically for you, or you can tell Excel how you want those bins created as well. So it can do a quick version of histogram for you, and Excel will create those bins. Sometimes the bins get a little bit weird though when Excel creates them. They're not very, they're not usually numbers that you would expect, you know, like whole numbers or halves or things like that. So you can actually tell Excel what you want your bins or your groups to be, but this is a different kind of chart. So there is no space in between the chart, and those bars are touching there. We can go into a lot more about histograms, and if you take stats, you will learn a lot more about histograms there, and all the different little side rules about creating them and using them. But again, this is another option that you can use in Excel. And then another one here, again, and these are ones that you can just play around with on your own, is a waterfall chart. So here you have things that are going up and down. So it tracks the addition and subtraction of values within a sum. So the fund, we're looking at the Sunrise Fund here over 5 years, and the initial and final value are shown in red. Positive changes are in green, and then decreased values are in dark gray here. So if you look at the data, we're starting with an initial value of 5,200. So you have this column that is 5,200. And then we're increasing it by 1,910. So your column kind of starts here and shows you just the change. So now you're going up by 1,910. In years 2 and 3, we're decreasing. So you're starting at the top here and going down. And then you're starting at this value and going down. Then we're going up again. So again, you're starting here where you stopped, going back up about 1,200, starting here, going back up about 1,800. And then that is the final ending value. So it kind of does this addition and subtraction piece for you, but more visually, showing you what parts are going up and then what parts are going down and where your ending value is at each point. All right, so the last thing I want to show you here, and I'm going to stop my share and bring up a different screen. All right, is another type of graph. It's not really as formal as some of the others that we've seen that have a lot of detail, and we can make legends and have titles and all that stuff, but there's some little things that we can do actually within Excel workbook as well. So these are called data bars, and they basically shade inside the cells and kind of give you a look at where the most common values are. So let me just give you an example. I'll show you what this looks like. So here I'm on my summary page, and I've just scrolled down so you can look. I'm in column G, and I'm looking at rows 32 to 43. And what I can do is just, again, kind of select these rows here. And I'm just selecting the ones that have the data in them. And I'm actually going to apply a conditional formatting. So I'm going to go here to my home feature. I'm going to select conditional formatting. And then there's something called data bars. And I'm going to use the gold gradient fill. So you could use solid fill as well and kind of preview. The solid gets a little bit dark though, so I think the gradients look kind of nicer. And again, you can play around with different colors and things. And then what they do here is the bars extend to show which values are the largest. So if you look at my column here, 14.4% is the largest. So that coloring goes all the way to the end. And then the 12% and the 11% are pretty close. So that coloring goes almost to the end. And then your lower values like the 2%, the 3% have shorter bars. So it kind of shows you the values in reference to each other. So the column or the row will be filled totally in for the highest value, and then the others are proportionate going downward. You can edit this as well, of course. So, if you're selecting your column here, you can go into your conditional formatting and you can manage your rules. So if I select my data bar rule, I could edit it. And I can, again, change things like the color, the fill, here's the preview, and I can also determine how far across I want my bar to go. So here, again, it's filling in the whole cell for the largest value, and I can change that. So if I want, I can just select number under here, and then I can edit how far I want that to go. So your book suggests using 0.25 as the value. Oops. Let's try that again. 0.25 and hit OK. And then I'm going to hit apply. And you can see now that they're defined. We're in reference to that value. So we're not extending it the whole way across, but you still have that proportionality where the longest row is the highest value. And then again, the 12% and 11 comes next. and the smaller ones are the 2, 3, 4. So they still are proportional, but you're not extending the whole way across the bar. So that can be helpful too. And again, these are sort of very light graphs, just to kind of meant to give a quick visual of where the most information is, and then kind of comparatively so. So it's not as rigorous as some of the other ones, but it's a nice quick visual where we can clearly see here that, okay, this is my longest bar. So most or the highest percent is in health services, right? My lowest bar is here. So the lowest percent is in telecom, right? So it gives us a little bit of information quickly. The other thing that we can do is create what are called sparklines, which are sort of mini graphs as well. And again, they go within the cells. So here we're going to create sparklines. I'm going to show you how to do that. And actually, let me go back to your text first for 1 second. All right, so here are some examples of different kinds of sparklines. And they're basically meant to show a quick trend in data. Again, you're not getting a ton of information here, right? These are such miniature little graphs, but they're kind of meant to give the reader that overall trend idea. So you can do it as a line, you can do it as a column, you can do it as wins and losses. So here, red would be a loss, green would be a win. So looking at the line, I think is a really nice one, particularly. You can see, for instance, how the price history changed over a given period. So whatever the data you have goes for. So maybe it's over the last 12 months, maybe it's over the last 10 years, whatever it is, you can kind of quickly look at that data in a miniature version. So we can see here, for instance, that this first fund or stock had quite a bit of ups and downs, whereas the second one was mostly increasing over this particular period. Again, it doesn't give us exact values, but we can see those overall trends. So they can be helpful as well for just a quick visual. So going back to our Excel, I'm going to go ahead and insert a sparkline, and we already have a place set up for it for our 10-year history here. So I'm going to select that 10-year history area. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit insert up top. And you can see there's a sparkline section over here. So you could do a line, you could do a column, win and loss. I'm going to do the line. That personally tends to be my favorite, but it depends on the data that you're looking at. So they're going to ask you what data you are considering, right? Because there is data that creates these lines, and it's not this data here. This is not enough data. You'd actually need some sort of historical data to use here to create that line. So this sheet does have it. At the bottom, we're going to go all the way to the right and click the one that says sector history. And you can see those same columns that we had on the other page, right? So we were just on our summary page. We had software, hardware, media, telecom, health, and so on. So when I go to sector history, you see software, hardware, media, telecom, health, etc. So it's the same category. So I'm using the data that is appropriate here, and I'm going to select this full data set because it does match all of my rows on the other page. So I'm going to start here. Let's see, we're going to go from B6 and select that first one. And I'm going to select this whole group. So I'm going down here to M45. And I should see that here in my data range. And my location range should not have changed. So it was where we originally selected I want that data to go. And then I can go ahead and hit OK. Oh, let's see, I must have hit something wrong here. Let's try this again. All right, let me try that again because I'm clicking something incorrectly. So I'm just going to start over and clear it out. And I found my issue. I had highlighted the wrong cells in the beginning. I'd gone too far. So I need to be careful. Before I had highlighted an extra cell by accident. So I'm going to highlight my cells again because I do need to make sure my categories are lining up correctly, right? If I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 rows here, then I need to have the 12 columns of data on my other page. So let's try this again. Let's make sure I don't make a mistake this time, I hope. I'm going to try selecting this data one more time. I'm going to hit OK. And finally, there are my Sparklines. All right, so again, just be careful. We all make mistakes. And all I had done there is I had highlighted an extra cell by accident. And Excel recognized that I did not have enough data to fill all of those cells, so it wasn't running correctly. So sometimes it's easier just to start over than to trying to keep fixing a problem. So I just started over and I tried it again. So here are my Sparklines. We can do some editing though. And just give me a moment with Zoom to kind of rearrange my screen. So if I highlight the Sparklines again, you can see they are grouped, and I have this Sparkline piece of information up here. I can go ahead and click that, and then I can make some changes. So I have it as line right now. You know, I could change to columns if I wanted to. I like the line. I'm going to stick there. I could change the style. So if I want to change my style of line, I could do that. I could change the Sparkline color. So if I would like this maybe to be orange instead, I can go ahead and make that change as well. I can also select things like the high point and the low point, which are really nice to kind of highlight the high and low point of my little mini graphs there, my trend lines. And I can change those colors as well. If I want the high point to be, I don't know, black, I can do that. And if I want the low point to be, I don't know, white, I can, oh, I don't like white. Let's change that one. How about dark blue? I can do that. So I can go ahead and tweak those. Your Sparklines are grouped if you do initially create them in groups like this. So if you need to ungroup them, you can, which allows you to just edit individual Sparklines instead. And the other thing you may want to keep in mind are the axes. So if you look at the axis here and I select it, it says automatic for each Sparkline. So that means that the axis could be different for each of my Sparklines based on the data sets that I use, right? I could have very different data in each of these columns. So they'll just kind of pick an axis appropriate. If you're trying to compare them though, you may want to have the same axes for all the Sparklines. So what you can do is you can click that feature in both cases, both for the minimum and maximum. And then you can see how they all changed a little bit. So we're using the same scaling now in both cases, that same vertical axis. So that does help if you're trying to compare them or carefully to each other, not just like a general trend. So that's something that could be helpful is that axis and deciding, you know, if you want it to be automatic, if you want to do something custom, if you want to create the range of values, you can do that as well. You could show axes if it's appropriate, and so on. So you have different features here you can use. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you guys about is just with your graphs, and I know I've said this probably 1,000 times at this point, but the point of graphs is to help the reader visualize the data, right? And we want to do so in an ethical and a true way. We obviously want our point to get across in our presentation, but we don't want to do anything that would be misleading to the reader, right? So when we do our graphs, it is important to provide enough information on our legends and titles, on axes and things like that, so the reader can follow along and clearly understand the information. We do also want to make sure it's not too cluttered, right? So color is used appropriately and to help the reader, not to distract the reader. So those things are all really important. Scaling is really important as well. So when you have graphs, particularly things like column or bar graphs, or even scatter plots and line graphs, the scaling on the X and Y axes are really important. You can really manipulate your data by manipulating the scale there. For instance, let's say that I don't know, a percentage is changing just a tiny bit, right? Maybe that the return went from 4% to 4.1%. Well, if my axis goes from 0 to 5%, then that will look like a very small change, right? If I make my axis go from 4 to 4.5%, that's going to look like a much larger change, right? So we can manipulate our axes, and we have to be careful there that we are not doing that. We want to accurately portray the information. So you do want to be careful there with your axes, truncating axes. So again, kind of cutting them shorter instead of looking from 0 up, looking from maybe just 4 to 5 is a way to manipulate those axes. So again, you just need to be really careful there as well, that we're not trying to deceive the reader and make a change look more or less important than it really is. So it's important to watch your axes there as well. For bar graphs, column graphs, you should always start at 0 on the vertical axis. The other thing is to just watch your graphs. We like to make them pretty. We like to make them eye-catching. But again, it should not distract from the reader. So one thing, our 3D graphs, really frowned upon. Yes, they look nice, but they usually distort the image. They distort the proportions and things like that. So we don't recommend 3D graphs typically, or pictographs as well. So again, they can be really distorting when you try to use pictures, like almost like we did when we were little, like pictographs, maybe using a car in place of car sales instead of just a bar. So you just want to be careful, again, with your graphs, that they are always helping the reader and accurately portraying the information and not trying to mislead. And if you look out in the world, there are a lot of graphs that are misleading out there. So we want to be on the side that doesn't do that. And sometimes people do it by accident. So with Excel, if you're just learning, you may not know sometimes that you're being misleading on your graph, right? So that does take a little bit of learning as well, as we go through.